One man's erratic behavior
He could have been having some type of breakdown, some type of mental breakdown.
leads to 4 men charged with murder.
They held him down and suffocated him.
2 security guards
beating him, punching him, kicking him.
and 2 hotel staff members.
He said, get back on him, get back on him. So I got back on him, but I didn't want to.
Are at the center of an emotionally charged investigation
It was so wrong of him to do.
that's drawn some of the biggest names in civil rights to Wisconsin.
How many more black men have to say, I can't breathe?
What they did was a crime.
This week on Open Record, how a dramatic disturbance at a Milwaukee hotel ended
I hate to see a man loses his life.
in sudden death. From the FOX6 studios, this is Open Record. I am Brian Polson, and I'm joined by Open Record's executive producer, Sarah Smith. Hello, Sarah.
Hi.
And we are joined by an Open Record first-timer. It is FOX6's Bria Jones. Hey, Bria. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It is good to have you on. We are recording this episode on, what is today? I'm already losing today's date.
August 14th.
Wednesday, August 14th for release on Thursday, August 15th. It's been about 45 days since a tragic incident outside the Hyatt Hotel in downtown Milwaukee. What started with one man's erratic behavior escalated into a violent struggle and ended in the death of 43-year-old Devontae Mitchell. We're going to talk about that disturbance, the hotel's response, the protests, the civil rights outcry, and now 4 charges of felony murder. Plus, we have a special guest coming up a little bit later on, and we'll get to all of that right after this. So it's a mild sunny Sunday afternoon, last day of June, and an off-duty security guard at the Hyatt Hotel spots a man outside who he says is begging for money. He tries to run him off not once, but twice, and eventually that man who we now know to be 43-year-old Devontae Mitchell runs into the hotel. Bria, you have been following this case now for weeks, literally weeks. What happens after Mitchell runs into the hotel?
Well, Mitchell runs into the hotel. He runs to the gift shop, we know, according to the criminal complaint. And then from there, he goes into the women's bathroom, which seems to be just where things essentially escalated. There were 2 women inside of the bathroom. One of them was able to quickly get out. The other, she was able to get out once one of the security guards, the off-duty security guard, ran into the bathroom. And that's when there was a struggle with the off-duty security guard and Mitchell. And from there, that's when we see that viral moment of him being, drugged outside of the hotel with the 4 men on top of him.
So there were 2 women in the bathroom, which we talked about, and they came out. Do we know, did they say anything? Did they seem scared? I know there was some surveillance video from inside the hotel.
Yeah, so finally, that was the big thing, because we didn't know what happened inside of the hotel. So for weeks, it was just the maybe minute or 2-minute clip you saw outside.
And that
of
was
them.
from a passerby, right?
Yeah, that was just
somebody
somebody outside who sent me an email and shared the video. Like, I want you to see this because, as his mother said, this is another George Floyd situation. And so that's when we have people like Attorney Ben Crump coming into town. But just going back to those initial moments, the 2 women that were in the bathroom from the criminal complaint, they were scared. They were in the restroom and a man ran into the bathroom, but they both said that he also seemed scared as well.
And that's what I think really one of the things that stood out, because you mentioned we see the end point of what's going on. We see the people, the hotel workers that are piled on top of him. We know the outcome. We know that he passes at the scene. But for weeks, we're wondering what actually happened inside. We're getting trickles of information that come out. And then it is the attorneys for the family who end up subpoenaing this video and releasing it publicly. So what we've seen, the video we've seen, have you watched all of that video from beginning to end?
Yes, I watched several of the clips, and that was, I think is it 4 or 5 angles, I believe. I was actually off when William Sultan released it, but I wanted to. I've obviously since then covered the story multiple times, so I had a chance to look at the video, and this was just the moment for me interviewing his sister, talking to his mom. They kept talking about the video because the DA showed them the video weeks before it was released to the public. And so they just kept saying he was in fear of his life. He was running in fear of his life. He was afraid of something, but they never knew what he was afraid of. All we knew from the initial police statement was there was some sort of disturbance, but the video actually showed us him frantically running into the hotel, running to the bathroom, and then you see that struggle, and that's when you see a guest get involved as well as a staff member hitting him with the broom.
Now, we also know, the question you have to ask when you start hearing this, and I've seen this video too now, I hadn't seen it all along, but why is he sort of running the way he is? Why were the women in the bathroom? I would imagine that would be pretty terrifying. He's a large man. He comes in, he locks the door. You're trapped inside. You don't know what's going to happen. Right. But they made the remark to police that he looked scared. And now we know, after the fact, the medical examiner's report comes out. He had drugs in his system. Yeah. His family has said maybe he's having some sort of a mental breakdown. Was he having a psychotic episode? Was this a drug-induced psychotic episode? Were there a combination of factors? But it really raises questions about what was going on in his mind as all this was happening. They described him as paranoid. Is that right?
I had a chance to speak with his mother several times now. She basically, because I asked that question specifically because from the beginning we were saying mental illness. And I'm like, well, what kind of mental illness was he suffering from? And the answer that she gave me was simply that he just hadn't been the same since his father died. So I'm not really sure if they even know exactly what his mental state was, but they do say that he was on the road to recovery. We know he had the cocaine and the meth in his system, but they say that he was trying to get his family back together. He has 2 children. He has a son, he has a daughter. He has a wife as well. So they were telling me that he was trying to get his life back on the right track.
So a security guard that's on duty is at the hotel. There's an off-duty security guard. Yes. They go in. Who goes into the bathroom then to get Mitchell?
So Brandon Turner goes into the bathroom to get Mitchell. He's actually off duty. So everybody kept saying that. But again, until you get the complaint, until you get the official documentation, you're just it's just hearsay at that point. So from this point, we know that Brandon Turner was just hanging out at work. He was off. Someone told me he was actually possibly on vacation. So in the criminal complaint, it says he was hanging out at work, about to go to like a restaurant.
Because we all hang out at work.
Who knows why? So he's hanging out at the hotel, and that's when he comes across Devontae Mitchell, who he says is panhandling, begging people for money. He's like, get out of here. And there, he says Mitchell runs into the hotel, which we see him frantically running through the lobby.
In watching the videos, it is very clear. One of the things you see is, and I think this is why the family wanted their video released, is you see and that's Turner who goes to get him in the bathroom, correct?
Mm-hmm, yes.
When they come out of the bathroom, it appears Turner is very aggressive with him. He's trying to get him out of the building, no question. So he may be aggressively trying to protect his patrons. I'm not making a judgment, but it's clear he is, and I believe it says in the police report, the police determine, or prosecutors determine, he is the aggressor at that point. Is that what you saw on that video?
I think that the struggle itself was really telling of, his family was saying, why not just, if he barricaded himself in the bathroom, why not leave him in there? I think that was the big question that his family is, they regret.
Except there was still a person in there though, right?
Well, there was a woman who was able to get out. So at that point,
but there was another one inside, I believe.
Well, by the time they both got out,
okay,
they're saying, why not just leave him there? Why not just let him stay in the bathroom by the time both women get out? Because both women were able to safely get out. The other woman kind of slid through the door as the struggle was happening. And so they're saying, why not just wait for the authorities to get there? You could have just let him, barricade himself in the bathroom until police arrived.
So he is taken out of the bathroom, dragged out, brought into the lobby. What happens in the lobby and how does it then get outside?
I think that's the other thing. The family wants 2 other people charged. They want the manager who you see in the video. She's the one who, according to the criminal complaint, actually hit him with a broom. And
you see that pretty clearly. She grabs the broom and hits his leg
because
twice.
Is Mitchell struggling at this point? Like, is he trying to fight?
Well, him and Brandon Turner, you don't really see him getting any punches from my perspective. I don't know if you guys saw something different, but you can see them. There's clearly a tussle that's happening because he's trying to stay afloat and then they're trying to bring him down.
It does seem from what I've seen in the video that Brandon Turner is certainly physically trying to get him out and he's trying to push his way back in. Yeah. So he keeps coming back. There's even a point at which when they get him outside, and you see probably the most dramatic videos where he's being dragged on his back, his shirt's off, dragging him by the arm to try to get him out the door. And as they're doing that, he eventually gets back up and tries to get back in. And that's when I think Turner either shoves or punches him and he falls to the concrete. So he is actively trying to get back in the building. And I think if you were one of those workers, you would say, probably, we're trying to keep him outside and he's trying to come back in. But when you talked about the punches, the punches we see come from Brandon Turner. They come from another security guard. They come from each of the people who is surrounding him. They continue to punch him. One actually pulls out a collapsible baton to try to get his arm behind his back. I don't think he hit him with it, but he tries to use it to pry his arm behind his back. Never see Devontae Mitchell throwing punches, but you do see him moving toward them and trying to. The expressions on his face. There's either distress, anger, something. He's excited.
Yeah, clearly that's what you see. And I think that at that point in time, it's like the video that stuck out to me was when they were dragging him out of the building. Obviously, like you said, he was leaning forward, like he wanted to stay in. He was, for some reason, wanted to be inside of the hotel, but it was the fatal moment of when they drug him out, and that's when all four of them were able to get on top of him. That's when Herbert Williamson, one of the defendants in the case, who was a bellman, he literally said he was dropping off luggage. He got off the elevator and came out to see Brandon Turner and Mitchell fighting. And from there, that's when Todd Erickson, the security manager, eventually got involved as well.
What are people seeing? I mean, it's the middle of the day. It's not overnight. It's not anything like that. It's not raining where people might not be outside. So, I mean, we have the video from the passerby. Yeah. What else? Have we heard from other people that were out there and saw what happened?
Well, originally we had about 2 videos. There was a perspective of when the first responders arrived on the scene and they were trying to resuscitate Mitchell. And then that initial video, well, the second video that we got, which happened before then, but you could just kind of see the interaction. I think that was what caught a lot of people off guard, the interaction between the hotel managers and the people who are recording saying this is wrong. And then they kind of get into it and, they're trying to stop people from recording and they're talking about, she has no business to do this and her livelihood and whatnot. So it's just kind of, they're being confrontational with the community as people are watching this. But even Mitchell's family, they're saying, why didn't anybody try to step in? But I could only imagine just how, intense that situation was.
I know that from one of the things I read in the criminal complaint that stood out is that video that the bystander took where you hear Devontae Mitchell saying, please, please. And there's telling him, stop or whatever it is. That's the only video that has audio where you can hear his distressed breathing. You can hear the things he's saying. The other videos we've seen, there's no audio. Right. So you see a lot of activity, but you can't hear. So that seemed to be influential in the prosecutor's decision is you could hear his pleas. You could hear his struggles with breathing. You've got the 4 people who are on top of him. They're obviously trying to hold him. And you can see he's still trying to get up. Yeah. He's physically resisting. He is not, just laying calmly until several minutes in and he stops moving.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's when, obviously, I think one of the defendants now in what is a criminal case said that's when he knew something was really wrong. When he stopped moving, he realized that maybe this was a bad situation. The death of Devontae Mitchell was not treated, though, as a criminal investigation, at least not right away. It took weeks for police to refer the charges and even longer for prosecutors to make that charging decision. We're going to talk about that part of the story, when we come right back. So the day after Devontae Mitchell died with 4 hotel workers pinning him to the ground, his family said they believed he was, quote, murdered. But police said it was not a criminal investigation, at least not at that point. You talked to family just within a couple of days after this. What were they saying at that time, and why were they so convinced this was murder?
From the very, very beginning, Devontae Mitchell's family, they said he was murdered. And so that's why they just could not believe that police were not considering this a criminal investigation. And it wasn't until maybe about 2 to 3 weeks after that we even learned that the DA's office was reviewing those charges because MBD had plainly said, hey, at this point, this is not a criminal investigation. Then it was like maybe a week later, it's like, well, our homicide investigation is, our homicide division is investigating this case. And then you go back to, hey, the charges are being reviewed. And then I say, well, hey, what charges? Because at this point in time, you guys told us this was not a criminal investigation. So what charges are under review? So we were actually able to break that they were reviewing those felony murder charges, which, the family said when I called them, they said, we had just learned earlier that morning, but we were told that it's something that had been in the works. So they were wondering why they weren't in on the loop.
So obviously the family wasn't just sitting around and waiting and hoping that something happened as far as charges.
They weren't quiet.
No, they were. It was vigils. It was protests. It was marches. They went to the DA's house. I mean, obviously they were very vocal about it. And a lot of members of the community also were with them too. This wasn't just 2 or 3 people. Do you think any of that public pressure had a role in maybe how officials handled the case?
I do. I actually went to the first protest at the DA's house, which they had it there because of the RNC. So a lot of the buildings, the government buildings, were closed downtown. And so they said, hey, if the DA isn't at his office, maybe he'll be at home, which I'm sure he probably wasn't at home because he had security guards that were there and police. There were at least like 5 or 6 squad cars on the block. But they actually went out to his home in Bayview and they protested for about an hour, just, walking around the front of the house. And then they went back to the house again. They went to the DA's office several times. They marched from the DA's office to the Hyatt Regency. So just a lot of movement here. And they honestly, at least every week for about 2 to 3 days, they were having protests.
You mentioned early on that the family had made some comparisons to George Floyd, the death of George Floyd, where obviously we know that a police officer in Minneapolis had his neck on George Floyd's neck for many minutes leading to his death. His knee was on his neck. And so we know that they've drawn that comparison. Since then, we've had Attorney Ben Crump come to Wisconsin. He is now representing the family. We've had, in fact, at the funeral for Devontae Mitchell, you have the Reverend Al Sharpton there.
Yes.
These are big names, big players in civil rights. What does that say about this case when you have these big figures coming here saying this case is a big deal?
I think that at the funeral, Al Sharpton clearly said they're going to learn to get their knees off our necks, even if we have to go from Minneapolis to Milwaukee. And so I think that was something that a lot of people heard. This case, again, mirroring for so many people, they feel like it mirrors the death of George Floyd just because of the situation of obviously not a police officer, but you have this man lying on the ground in the prone position who ultimately died. So I think just off the rip, there are so many people that look at Devontae Mitchell. There's the video as well. There's just so many similarities that immediately people go there.
So we talk with the family and you talk with the family and then another interview opportunity.
This was remarkable.
This
to me.
was like truly wild to me. So one of the 4 hotel employees talked with you on camera about what happened.
As he knows there's this investigation going on.
no charges had been filed at that point.
No charges had been
Nothing,
filed.
And so what was that?
That was
about?
honestly a really surreal moment just because he saw, we broke just the day before that they were reviewing the charges. So he called us and he said, I want to share my story.
This was
Herbert Williams.
Herbert Williamson.
He
Okay,
was the bellman. He had been working there he told me about 3 months. I think the criminal complaint says like a month and a half, but he told me he had been working there only 3 months. So fairly new to the job, but he called us and he said, I want to share my story with Fox 6. Of course, when I got there, he was hesitant. It's one thing. We all know how it is when you show up with the actual camera. But he eventually, I was able to get him to open up and he shared his story with us of how this manager, the manager that the family once charged, we're hearing that she was fired because Aimbridge Hospitality, Hyatt, they released kind of a generic statement saying they let go of several employees. So we don't even know how many people were fired from this Devontae Mitchell situation. But again, he opened up and shared that, he says he dropped off that bag. He came downstairs. He saw the struggle in the lobby and the manager said, hey, go help them. And he said even while he was on top of Mitchell, which he said he maybe had his knee on his back a few seconds at a time. But he said he tried to get up and that main security guard, the one who has the highest bail amount, Todd Erickson, told him to get back down.
What's interesting to me, now he did say, he told you that he had tried to get back up and was ordered to get back down.
Yeah.
In the criminal complaint, there's no mention of that in his statement, that he said that to police. But a different employee, and we see this on video, who had his legs, tried to get up and was in fact ordered to get back down and get back on his legs. So we know that at least Erickson told one of the other employees, he's saying it happened to him as well. And I'm trying to imagine that dynamic. You are this new employee.
Yeah.
None of them are trained.
Right.
We'll talk about this more in a little bit.
Yeah,
None of them are trained in security or any kind of arrest techniques or anything like that. And he's just being told by a boss, no, you do this. He does have his knee right in his back. He's on top of him. You see that clearly in the video. He's now going, I could go down for murder, and I'm just trying to do what my boss said.
Yeah.
I don't know that this is how people die this way. But I would imagine if he had an attorney at that time, the attorney would have said, don't talk to Fox 6.
Yeah.
Because he's saying, yeah, I did it, and I'm sorry it happened. And he seemed to clearly, obviously, have great empathy for the family and regret what the outcome was.
He deeply regrets. I mean, from our conversation, he's like, he can't eat. He can't sleep. And I think that the thing, I watched his bond hearing the other day. The state only asked for $5,000, the same that they gave Devin Johnson Carson. But the the judge on the case was like, hey, I felt like you played a larger role than that. So they actually increased his bond amount to $15,000, which I could then just see the devastation on his face because he just lost his job. He's unemployed. And he did this, in fact, so he did not lose his job. And ultimately, that's what happened.
So we know that this wasn't a case where nobody shot him, nobody tased him, anything like that. They were on top of him. He was face down for 8 or 9 minutes, and ultimately the medical examiner rules his death to be caused by restraint asphyxia in combination with the meth, the cocaine, and his BMI of 40. He's a large man. All of those are factors that are known to contribute to that positional asphyxia. And we're going to talk to a man who knows all about that. When we come back, we're going to be joined by an expert in police and security training, Tom Sippen. We'll do that right after this. So when it comes to controlling and securing a combative subject, Tom Sippen knows how it's supposed to be done. He is the owner of Four Winds Martial Arts and Hardened Target Personal Protection in West Dallas. And Tom joins us now on Open Record. Tom, thank you. I know you've got a busy day. You have training going on right now, but you're taking time out to talk to us. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So the medical examiner says Devontae Mitchell died of restraint asphyxia. That's not a new term. In fact, it's something you've been hearing about for a very long time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. It came up important for police training back in the late 80s and the 90s, where there was, they recognized there was a problem there. Originally what happened was, you always hear a lot of times people talking about, it took 6 cops to hold me down and, things like that. And really what had happened was there was a lot of outcry when law enforcement, when police were trying to arrest someone, and it ended up to be a struggle, and it ended up being, a fighting match back and forth, people getting hit. And it was bad. Why are you having to hit them? And it was found that, a lot safer and better publicly if we can put the person on the ground and hold them down by body weight instead of striking the person down to the ground, is hold them down by body weight until you can get them handcuffed, in restraints. It would be better, safer. Unfortunately, then what was found was that brought up the other problem of, as you mentioned, at the time it was called sudden custody death syndrome, positional asphyxia, in that where in the space of fighting with somebody for different things, somebody ended up dying right after the fight, right after the restraints were applied. And the question was, okay, how did this happen? They weren't hit, they weren't struck. And it was found that when pretty much anyone recognizes that if you're on an exercise program, you don't start from cold, all of a sudden running as fast and as hard as you can. And just like that, when you're done, you don't stop and just stand still, because your heart is pumping out a large volume of blood. And when you're still moving, you're running, you cool down, the blood's going in a circle. It's going out of your heart, it's going back into your heart. And if you suddenly stop moving, the blood's no longer going in a circle. Your heart's still trying to pump a large volume, but it's not coming back in. And that's what was found to be causing the fight. Someone was put on the ground. They were pumped up, even without the artificial stimulants or without the comorbidities. If your heart rate was up 180, 200, higher than that, and all of a sudden you basically stopped, and how were you stopped? You were put on the ground and then held down. If you lay on your stomach after exercising, you see it's a lot harder to breathe. And if you handcuff somebody behind their back, when you bring the hands back, it makes it harder to breathe. So in all those different positions, it just keeps adding up and ending up with restricting the blood flow back to your heart. And people were dying, not from the force that was used, but from holding them down.
Tom, what strikes me is you said you knew this back in the late 80s and early 90s. It's 2024. You know this. Police are trained this way. Milwaukee police have a policy that says the moment it's great to have someone in a prone position to get them handcuffed. The moment you have them in those restraints, you turn them on the side, you sit them up, you do something to avoid this very thing. You know that. You train people in that. These people, the 4 employees at the hotel, even the 2 that were officially security guards, had no training in this. because the two security guards were not licensed and the other two weren't guards at all. How important is it when you have, and how much of a problem, how much of a risk is it when you have people engaging in this type of a takedown or restraint and they have no training and no idea that this exists?
Well, if you give people no training on how and when to act, obviously things are going to happen. When it comes to use of force, subject where people's injuries or their life are involved, I would think that it's really important, which is why, again, I've been training police, military, security since 1980. And you realize that, you're liable for things. The people you train are liable for things. That's why it was required for police departments. We did that. But when we do anything, always from handcuffing, you handcuff somebody on the ground, like you mentioned, as soon as possible, get them up, at least sitting. We go as far as saying, if you can get them up and have them walk, as strange as it sounds, it's not the best, but it's better than nothing. And you can't leave them laying on the ground. But that's because you recognize the problems, you address it by having training put in. When you have people that are using force on others, as a private citizen, you're not required to know what the laws are. You're not required to know how to use force safely or when. You're not required to do anything afterwards. Law enforcement, you are. Private security, you should be, but you're not required. And that's even if you're working as licensed security. When you're not licensed, what's required? Nothing. So how, in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of other trainers, how can you put someone in a position to use force if you don't train them, one, what the laws are, two, how to use it, when, why, and then what to do afterwards for proper aftercare? If you don't do any of those things, how can you expect things not to go terrible?
I could ask 100 questions, but Bria, this has been your story. What questions do you have for Tom?
I think just hearing him talk, I think the biggest question now is, what do you think the liability will be for, Hyatt, for Ambridge Hospitality, since they were the ones who put them in this position without that training?
That's a good question. And seeing as I do a lot of this the work as an expert witness and consulting and testifying, there's only a certain amount that I'm going to get into. But I mean, to start with, you've got civilians that did the actual job. If you're working and the boss tells you do this and you want your job, what do? You do it. You aren't knowledgeable in those areas, but you also don't refuse what your boss tells you if you want to keep the job. Supervisors, obviously, you would expect that they would have more knowledge of the people you control. But the people you control, okay, it's one thing. You have a title, you're a security officer. Well, if you're working with helping with luggage and you're helping with the elevator, what has that got to do with security functions? So the supervisor obviously should be in more control. Other people step in to help. Private citizens, a lot of times, if you see someone that's struggling and you feel that they could use help, they need help, private citizens a lot of times will step in to try and be the good Samaritan and help out the situation. What's require them? Nothing. So you go up to the supervisor, and now you go up to the people above them. They're the ones that put these people in that position. Well, what's required of them? One of the things that we always train private security is your immediate supervisor. How much do they know about the law is, and what your training requirements or recommendations are? And usually, like as in this case, supervisors aren't required to know any of those things. So very few of them know anything about those things.
Well, and Tom, I think it's really interesting here because we've talked about this. We've done investigations on this here recently, that the city of Milwaukee tried to require security guards who work directly for a business. And there's a distinction. If you're working for a third-party private security agency, then you have to be licensed by the state to do security. But if you work directly as an employee for a business, you're a bouncer at a bar, you work security at a hotel, you don't need that license. You can just do that job. The city tried to pass its own licensing requirement. They did, in fact, do that. And they got sued by several businesses who said that's unconstitutional. And then they found, in fact, The state law already prohibits the city from creating new licenses, and that was the thing that finally got it shot down. The ordinance has been withdrawn. So that isn't the case. So these employees who were working security for the hotel, they were direct employees. If I understand correctly, they weren't required to have state licenses to do security. How do you feel? I think we've talked about this before, but how do you feel about that? And what kind of a risk do you think that places the public in when you have people working with no training at all?
Well, we went through this, like you mentioned, we went through this a while ago with the lack of requirements for training private security carrying firearms using deadly force. Unfortunately, as far as requirements, we tried a long time ago to get requirements in. Law enforcement, you're using force. It's recognized. You need to be trained. You're liable. Private security, well, you know what? They've got the same job as law enforcement. You're protecting people and property. And whoever puts you in that position should recognize you're putting them there specifically because they might have to use force. How can you do that without giving them training? If you were an electrician and a plumber, if you put, advertise, you need to follow those, requirements and get licensed. Somebody's safety is involved. Well, it's not involved for private security. We tried to get that changed. Representative Jesse Rodriguez, about a little over a year ago, we tried to get it put back in where it's required training for private security. Unfortunately, that did not go through. Now, as I understand, Glenn Moore is trying again at a state level to get those reintroduced. I don't understand how they cannot be required. It's an occupational requirement. Being a doctor, you have to go through training to say, well, I'm going to do this. You have to be, ask a doctor if you know someone that's licensed to give you an aspirin. In schools, the school nurse to give out an aspirin. If you're a professional, there are certain things that you cannot do. But in private security, like we've been going through with this, apparently you don't have those same concerns.
There is one other thing that stood out to me in this case that I think, especially with the ultimate determination of positional or restraint asphyxia, the four men who were on top of Devontae Mitchell held him there because they were waiting for police to arrive. They didn't have handcuffs.
Yeah.
They weren't private security guards who were licensed who would typically carry handcuffs. So they couldn't handcuff him and turn him onto his side or sit him up. Their only way to keep him under control, they felt, it appears, was to continue to stay on top of him. Does that also play into this, that they didn't have the proper equipment to restrain him in a safe way?
Two things. Three things. One is by putting the handcuffs on, you're implying that they could get him into a position to put the handcuffs on. Okay, which means you had to have training. The second thing is to use handcuffs, you have to have training to make sure you put the handcuffs on him properly. You can cause permanent damage. So you need training for that, but you need the other training before that. Now, the practical result of this is for private security companies, that costs money for them to train people. Private security is a real cutthroat business. So if you can save money by cutting out training, that's what, unfortunately, that's what they do. There are some handcuffs that are safer to use, but it still requires training. And lawfully, if you're putting handcuffs on the wrong person and you've had no training on what the laws are, that's false imprisonment. You can be in a lot of trouble there. Definitely if you're holding somebody, you need some type of restraints and here's the other part, training not just in the use of force but it's the aftercare. Like we mentioned before, if somebody's on the ground with training, you'd recognize where you reach the point where it's no longer controlling. It's a matter of a possible medical emergency. But if you've had no training before that, how can you expect people to have the training up to that point where, okay, it's a medical emergency now, you're no longer controlling anybody, you got to go on to the next step and you have to do it now.
Tom Sippen, thank you so much for being here. I know you, speaking of training, you're literally involved in an all-day training today. You took some time aside to give us your expertise here on Open Record, and we really thank you for that.
Well, actually, this is providing one of the, reinforcement for one of the training subjects that we're using today.
All right, excellent. Well, again, Tom, thank you very much. We appreciate you being here on Open Record.
Thank you.
All right, and we will go off the record when we come right back. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question for which we have done absolutely no preparation, except if your name is Sarah Smith.
That's
because
me.
She has that question.
That's
so
me.
What's in store?
Bria, are you nervous?
I am, because I don't know what you're about to
Yesterday,
say.
we had a meeting and there was some talk about what was the question? If you were a tree, what tree would you be? That's not today's question.
Not the one that not a birch, because I'm mad at birches right now. After
well, you had a little bit of a situation.
Anyone watching on video, you can see the bruised arm. I'm bruised all up and down here. I had a bad run-in.
That's a ladder
with a tree branch
function.
at home, and it knocked knocked a ladder I was on down, and I went. The worst part of the story is that my Ring camera died an hour before this happened.
Yeah.
So I have no video evidence.
That's probably good, because you would have went viral.
Well,
and then
I
you would
I
have never
wanted to
lived
post
it
that
down.
thing.
point,
I wanted
the
to.
bruises,
I'm
it
like,
would have been
if
worth
I'm going to
it.
be heard, I want to put that thing on YouTube.
That's fair. That's
But,
fair.
no.
Okay. We're talking about setting alarms, sleeping, setting alarms, waking up. So there was a recent story where a nurse on TikTok was warning people, if you need multiple alarms to wake up, it could be harmful to your health. Basically, the thought behind it is that they disrupt the REM cycle. So if your alarm goes off and then you hit snooze, or you turn it off,
So
and you
these
wait
are
for
the
next
snooze
one,
police.
It's yeah, that's fair. And so I guess my question is, are you a multiple alarm person? Are you a snoozer, or do you, when that alarm goes off, you're up and at 'em?
Okay, see, this scares me because I had to set 4 alarms to be here.
You know, Bria who works night side.
Now, is this just about sleep, or is this also about like having multiple alarms to remind you of an
No,
important
sleep.
meeting? Or
I would
okay,
say sleep.
Okay, all right.
That's just being forgetful, Brian. But this is like sleep and waking up. So, okay, so you had multiple alarms.
Yes, I had. I work night side, so
Yes.
you know, I
So your
got home
bedtime
at,
is
like,
much later
11.
than probably mine and
Yes,
Brian's.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so your multiple alarms. Do you snooze them, or do you just turn them off
I
and pray for
may
the next
have
one?
hit the snooze today because it was a little early.
That's fair,
And I
that's
haven't
fair.
had any coffee. Yours smells delicious.
Oh,
I don't come here without coffee.
that's
Everyone knows
ever.
that. Yeah.
Doesn't matter what time we record.
If I'm late, I'm going to be 2 more minutes late, and I'm waiting for the coffee to
That
brew.
coffee
So that's
brewing.
how
Okay,
it is. Yeah.
Brian, are you an alarm?
So I set one alarm, but then I do usually hit snooze a couple of
snooze.
times
Okay.
because and I tell myself I'm not going to, and then it goes off, and I'm like, I got 7 minutes. I
Yeah,
gotta
but
wait
that's
here.
what I'm
And
saying. I was like,
7
yeah.
more minutes. Now my wife is worse than I am, and she's gonna hate listening to this podcast one day if she ever does, because I talk about her all the time. But she will hit, especially if it's a day she doesn't have to get up right away. She'll hit snooze 7 or 8 times, and there's a certain point at which I'm like, I would have rather had that extra hour, but she'll just keep hitting it, and then eventually go, crap, I have a meeting.
Oh yeah,
You know,
and now I'm late,
then-
right?
right. So I'm a maybe a 1 or 2 snooze, and then I got to kind of get out of bed. But I will and I'm not going to try to name anybody and throw them under the bus. But I have another family member who has a hard time waking up when the alarm goes off, and we have
This
I'm
person.
going to say this word, and it's going to set everybody's off. We have the Alexa Echo.
Oh,
whatever
yeah,
dots
yeah,
at home,
yeah.
right? And so his alarm for a long time was set to, you can set the alarm to, instead of being a beep, it could be a song.
Oh, it's a song.
Right.
Yeah.
So he set it to I'm trying to remember the band who the theme from Shrek. Somebody once told me. So that would go off, and
He
the
chose to wake up to
entire
that.
song would play, and he wouldn't wake up. And it was in the room next to me. And so I would lay there going,
Oh gosh.
and singing the lyrics along, and all day long I'd have Shrek in my head. And I'm like, come on. So eventually, realizing that wasn't working, moved to instead this sort of like shock alarm, this thing like it's this horrible sound.
I don't like that either.
Again, wasn't enough.
I need a noise.
Except for me.
Because if it's a song that I like, then I'm probably going to just kind of sleep through it. 'Cause
Yes. Yeah,
it's my song.
Right,
you know?
right.
But if it's an annoying like chirp or beep or something.
I hate when someone's like ringtone is my alarm. Like I'll be sitting in a meeting and I hear it and I get like a twitch. I'm like, that's your phone ring? That's my alarm. Like I'm having these
Triggered.
flashbacks. Yeah. Now,
Okay.
are you
I'm sorry.
people
Go
that
ahead.
set alarms to like rounded times? Like are you like a 5 a.m.? or a 5:15. Are you on like the whole numbers? Does that make sense?
I mean, I'm not setting it for like 7:23.
That's what I do.
No,
Yeah,
that's
I'm that
psychotic.
No,
Why?
well, I go to therapy for it. No, but I have this thing. I cannot set it for 25 or the top of the
Okay,
hour.
maybe it's
like
not psychotic. That just
7:02,
seems like okay. So that's
7:24. It's just a
I'll try
thing.
to like sneak in. Maybe there's like 2 minutes that I can like, work in
Those
there.
extra 2 minutes.
is
might
it like
be
a
the difference.
superstitious thing? You
It's-
just feel
yeah,
that
it's
the
like a
number
weird
doesn't
thing.
feel right.
It doesn't feel good.
Okay.
It feels
So
better.
you're not setting it for
So
8
like
a.m.
4:46. That's my alarm. I don't. Yeah, there's other problems I have. Kale, do you set an alarm? What's your alarm set?
It's one alarm, but I often snooze 2 or 3 times. This week, I probably every single day snoozed for an hour.
Whoa.
And then I wake up and it's just
No,
you're-
no. When
do
you
you
say
cheat
snooze, do
yourself
you
enough?
reset the alarm or are you hitting
No,
snooze
I'm just
every-
hitting snooze because it's my phone, so I just grab it and hit any button, and it just it snoozes. Have you guys seen those alarms where it's like it's a drone that flies up and flies somewhere in the room, and you have to physically get up
get
and
up
catch
and like
it?
chase it.
Yes.
I would smack that drone so hard. I just, like I would.
Well, do you keep your alarm? No, I assume your alarms are on your phones, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
like, who has a clock radio nowadays? But do you keep it next to your bed so that you just do it, or do you keep it
It's
across
right
the
there.
room so you
It's
have?
right
Oh,
there.
it's,
Right
no,
there.
it's within
Okay.
reach.
My
Yeah,
baby.
same. That's what
No,
I just keep checking them.
look, I know this is a terrible habit. It's awful, but I have it there. And what'll happen sometimes, like normally, I think until a certain time of morning, it's in the do not disturb, right? So,
yeah.
But sometimes if I'm sleeping past the do not disturb time, I don't know if that's 7 a.m. I don't know what it is, and I'll hear the buzz, and of course, invariably, what's the buzz? And I have to check it, and then it's an email, and I read the email, and that leads me to a
then you
link, and then
rabbit
I'm on
hole.
Facebook,
Yeah.
and then I'm doing that for 20 minutes, and I
Yeah.
go, I'm going back to bed, and then I put it back
Oh
down.
no, that's where I go.
Okay, I'm the
Oh
same
no,
way.
I have to get up. Like,
No, I-
I'm with Brian on this one. I'm gonna lay back down.
I try when my alarm goes up. I try to sit up on the edge of the bed if I'm
Okay.
gonna do something else. Then I'm like up.
Do you remember back in like ringtones? Because now there's so many ringtone options that like I have the iPhone. There's a bunch of different ones and they're all stock. But it used to be you'd like get a ringtone and you'd make your own from a song or whatever. So I had one at one time that was I don't know if I should tell this story on open record. Because
Well, now you
how
have
many
to.
minutes do we have?
Now you have
Is
to.
it incriminating or?
a little bit.
I like this.
I'm just gonna say, I'm not gonna. It's it's sad that this doesn't identify a single person. It's an ex, but
okay, X.
Does she listen to the podcast?
probably not.
Hi,
and-
X.
We'll find out.
Won't after this. But I had a ringtone that was set to, and I can't even think of the name of the band. The song was the Lips of an Angel is the name of the song. But the line in the song that would play was, "Honey, why you calling me?" And then every time my phone would ring at work, that's what it would say.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I had a producer at the time who said, "Why do you have that ringtone?" And like noticed that it was like a
Schmoopy whoopie.
It's kind of like some people. I did actually have someone who I had been in a relationship with who their ex, when their ex called, it came up with the Darth Vader, the march or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, did she have you put the song there? or
No,
did she
no,
ask to?
no,
that
no.
was a
I did because
choice.
the "Honey, why you calling me" is like it's annoying me. I'm at work and I don't need to be bothered right now. That was the point. It wasn't like
The
this is so
foreshadowing
wonderful.
is wild.
I didn't explain. This wasn't a sweet thing. This
See, I
was
gonna
why are
say,
you
oh my
bothering me?
gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So it.
So that's why she's an ex. Okay.
Probably explains why. Probably explains more about me than it
and
does about her.
others,
Is I think
yeah.
what we're really talking about here. I don't know.
One of my college roommates, the second year, her first year, she lived with just a random person, but the other girl, we'll call her Ashley. I think her name was Ashley. But
Ashley Sears.
no, not at all. But her alarm was like a CD player, so it was like a clock CD player thing, but you could set the alarm. And this girl had it set so that the CD would start playing when the alarm went off. But it was the same song every day, and it was the first like 8 bars of Eagle Eye Cherry Save Tonight.
Give us a little something. Yeah.
And then it's gone and close the curtain.
I'm wondering if we do this almost like it's open record karaoke. At what point do we run into problems with like rights?
Probably 15 seconds. But every time I hear that Eagle Eye Cherry song, I'm like, oh, Ashley had that alarm.
Well, this has been good. Bria, I'm so glad you got to be here.
I know,
I'm
I'm
sorry
happy
it took
to be
this long
here.
to get you here, but we'll have to have you back again soon.
No, this was a great, insightful conversation, and thank you all for allowing me to be here.
And I know it's not the end of your coverage of this case. Obviously, the Devontae Mitchell case is ongoing. The 4 felony murder charges have now been filed, and we're going to follow those cases through court. So, maybe we'll have to have you back as we find out what happens next.
Of course, we have the criminal side, and then obviously we have Ben Crump, William Sultan, Biavri Lamar working on the civil litigation as well. So
a lot more to come on that. All right, we will take one more break and wrap things up when we come right back. That's all the time we have for this week. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send an email to fox6investigators@fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible, including our executive producer, Sarah Smith, our editor, Dave Machuda, and our chief photographer manning the video switcher once again this week. It is Kale Zimney. With that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.